Welcome to the Power Hour, optometry's biggest and longest running show. I'm your host, Eugene Shatsman, and today we're talking about something that is really, really interesting. I think you're going to find the show fascinating because everybody sees AMD patients in their practice, and for years, providers spend time telling patients our goal is to slow this down. Well, what if there was hope in another way? My guest today, Dr. Dalton Brothers and Dr. Chris White. Both of these guys are using photobiomodulation in their practices to treat AMD patients. And they even bought case presentations with them for our YouTube viewers. Dalton has roughly 200 AMD patients in treatment with photobiomodulation. Chris started less than a year ago and is already adding a few cases every single week. They are seeing patients maintain vision where decline was expected. They're seeing improvements in functional vision, and in some cases, dramatic changes in the retina itself. Dalton even walks us through his own mother's case, again, for the YouTube viewers, including all the improvements in visual acuity. But this is not just a clinical conversation. We also get into the business model too, which, by the way, is very interesting because these are very short, largely staff-driven patient visits, and patients may require 18 or more visits in the first year. And both doctors talk us through how patients can qualify for reimbursement with insurance, but also how patients don't really have a lot of resistance to the cash pay model here. So when I did the math, and I did it live on air with both of these doctors, the numbers got very interesting very quickly. So you're going to want to pay attention. So today we're going to talk about evidence, protocols, patient outcomes, reimbursement, practice economics, and we'll even show you some of the actual cases if you're watching this on YouTube. One quick note, if photobiomodulation is not on your radar yet, I think this episode is going to get your attention. I was able to track down the manufacturer of the devices that both of these doctors are using, and I got them to sponsor the show. So in the middle of the show, there's a little commercial where they provide a special offer for all of the Power Hour listeners if you're interested. As always, make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And if you have any questions, ideas, feedback, reach out to me at eugeneshatsman.com. And now let's get into today's show. So excited to have both of you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful honor to be a part of this.
Likewise, what a privilege. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So guys, let's go one at a time and just 30 seconds context about each of your practices. So the audience has that information before we dig into the big topic at hand. Dalton, you go first.
Sure. I practice down in Joplin, Missouri at a single location. We have a total of 4 doctors, and it's been going now for about 70 years. And so I'm third generation myself, and have been working alongside with my dad and I now for the last 7 or 8 years. And it's been something that we've been having a wonderful success and really looking forward to seeing what's coming next.
That's awesome. That's great. Third generation, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
I've had my grandpa was one of the ones that fit a lot of my patients with their first pair of glasses, and now we're doing some techniques to keep their vision on the other end of it. It's always really nice to see that kind of coming into fruition this way.
I like. We're going to talk about some of those techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, tell me about your practice.
Yeah, so I started practicing in the San Juan Islands in like 1991. I commuted there by airplane from Bellingham for quite a while until I figured out I could actually find a way to live there. And I have 2 offices. One's on San Juan Island, one's on Orcas Island. I commute back and forth by powerboat. And so I'm a pretty lucky chap. My average age of patients are around 72 years old. And so I treat geriatric eye care. It's a privilege.
Year-round commute by boat?
Year-round.
It's got to be, you got to make sure you have a heater on the boat in Washington State. In the
heaters, de-icers, radar, yes.
All right. So, gentlemen, we have, and I can ask you a lot of questions about that because some of the audience knows I love boating. So I'll resist and I'll get to the topic at hand. Today's show is about photobiomodulation. Dalton, tell me how you became familiar with this. Maybe explain it for those in the audience who are not so familiar with it, and just give me a little bit of history on your journey.
Sure. So photobiomodulation, I guess, at its element is the use of light to induce a change within a cellular environment. And my introduction with photobiomodulation actually came through the more traditional dry eye and aesthetics route of operating with this within the last 7 years in a practice. And prior to optometry school, my background was actually through stem cell research, platelet rich plasma, and the use of basically trying to help with regenerative medicine to try and help the body heal by offering it all the tools that it needed and giving it all the building blocks that it could to function at its best. And so with what we do in now is that we're using light to introduce the ability for the body to heal itself and to elicit all of these different changes that are happening at a cellular place.
Got it. And so talk about how you came to learn about it. You said aesthetics. Give that a little bit more context there.
Sure. So whenever we joined in the practice, and I say we, my wife and I ended up actually purchasing our own dry eye suite whenever we came into the practice because the office traditionally had never really operated with dry eye as a forte within the office. And so me and her actually ended up privately funding our own IPL and bringing this into practice. And the rest of my partners got tired of paying me the extra amount, and so they're like, "For your benefit, we're going to take over this lease for you, so you don't have to worry about it." But when we joined in, we started going to all the neighboring clinics and saying, "Send us your driest patients that you had, the ones that you've had the most difficult time medically managing, and we'll offer them some solutions that they may never have heard about." And we brought in photobiomodulation to actually improve our IPL results. And at this point, we had patients that were had the worst of the worst dryness conditions set up initially, and we brought this in to help them have better outcomes in their treatments. And we did this for a few months before we ended up having some additional studies came out that kind of we'll get into here in just a little bit for sure. But ours came through the dry eye space, but a lot of these are the same devices that are actually used aesthetically from cosmetic surgeons, dermatologists, and a lot of other different types of providers that operate this way. And so we were having aesthetic side effects, and patients would eventually want to come back in for those as the chief complaint. And so initially we were starting to treat these IPL patients with both dry eye and aesthetics as kind of our little niche within optometry for the first 5 or 6 years. And then all of a sudden that's kind of changed as of the last two because of this type of therapy for sure.
Okay, and we're going to talk about the studies momentarily. Chris, talk a little bit about how you got involved with photobiomodulation.
Well, it's a lot like Dalton. Actually, I went to a meeting and I had every intention to come home with an IPL machine, and I bought one. And sadly, they didn't deliver it. So 2 months, 3 months later, I still didn't have my IPL machine. And so I terminated that agreement, and I get a call out of the blue from a fellow by the name of Blair. And he says, "I just heard you need a new vendor." And so he says, "Well, you're going to learn about IPL, but you're also going to learn about low-level light therapy and soon photobiomodulation." And he says, "The best thing that ever happened is you didn't buy that one instrument because you really needed two." And that's turned out to be absolutely the case. So dry eye is what drove me into the conversation. And it's turned into that and many other things. And
So,
photobiomodulation is clearly one of them.
Chris, how long ago did you treat your first AMD patient?
Well, I'm going to just change my volume just a little tiny bit. The answer is I made a decision to purchase the new machines in September. And I think I actually looked at the date. My first treatment was in November of 2025. So not that long ago. It's less than a year.
Okay, and Dalton, let's go back to you. When was your first AMD patient treated with low level light therapy?
This was probably in I would want to say like maybe like the 1st of November of 2024. So this was right after the light sight trials had been published. And we reverse engineered that and put that into our own device and started to actually treat patients within about 2.5 to 3 weeks, I think, after it was published.
Okay,
And
so
so
actually
we've
let's
been
talk about that. So what was published? What did you read? What encouraged you? And maybe let's even talk about uh, what you decided to be who was brave enough to be your first patient.
Yeah, of course. So the the trials that really kind of was my introduction into this was the light sight trials. So there had been some previous work that was done in this space by 2016 by Dr. Mary. I believe he was out of Canada if I remember correct. And the light sight trials were actually based off of that previous research in 2016. But whenever they published at the end of 2024, they had three key interesting facts that they had from patients who had macular degeneration, these treatments. The first one is that they had a majority of the patients in their treatment group have at least one line of improvement in visual acuity over a period of 2 years. The second outcome was that they had patients have a measurable reduction in drusen volume, which wasn't completely unheard of at this point, but it wasn't always considered a great thing by retina specialists and most of the people that practiced with posterior segment, because whenever drusen would disappear, you would generally have geographic atrophy kind of show up in its place. But the third facet of that came from this light sight trial was that there was no patient in the treatment group who developed new lesions of geographic atrophy. And so whenever we read that study, we said if there was an option that we have to be able to improve the vision of our macular degeneration patients, reduce their disease burden, and potentially slow down the rate of progression over time, whatever it was, even if it only did one of those three things, we wanted it. And at that point, that's whenever we sought out to find out really what was the differences between how these devices worked, the type of technology from it, and it disappeared into a rabbit hole of research articles and all of the other deep dives through PubMed and all of the Google Scholar results, and had long conversations with AI about all of these things until we felt comfortable enough to be able to find out and say, okay, this device that we had brought in for the use of IPO results, what separated the use of these kind of devices from one another? And then we found out and said, how do we safely implement this? And we brought this in and had our retina specialist that did medical retina in town, and we had passed all of this by her, and she agreed and came in and saw the device. We talked all through this process of it, and we began to co-manage a lot of cases immediately. But one of the first patients actually ended up being my own mother, and in her case was the one that we had started out where she had RK surgery. She had already had cataract surgery. It was something that she had macular degeneration, and her eyes were definitely well into the moderate, probably going in the moderate severe direction as far as just the sheer number of drusen that were present in the back of her eyes. And at 65 years old, this had been something that we'd been battling her macular degeneration for 10, 15 plus years. Not myself personally, but my family, as we've been practicing for quite some time, that we had been following her over the last 2, 3 decades and saw these changes happening really early on in her life. And so we decided to start implementing it in her case. And after 3 months of doing those treatments is whenever we actually saw the first change that actually showed up in the back of her eyes. And ever since then, it really kind of lit the fire of saying, oh my God, there's actually something to this. And we replicated it, continued it on, and now it's where we're at today. Was all started from that first little drusen change in the back of her eyes.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I'm curious to hear more about the volume that you're seeing right now. How many patients do you have in treatment on the on this particular therapy?
Yeah, for the macular degeneration side, we're right around 200, I believe, is right where we're at currently.
Okay, Chris, what about you?
So I did run those numbers. We have 42 cases since November, and we're usually adding two or three a week at this point. It's helpful for our patients to know that there's a Medicare reimbursement for this now, and for those who was a little bit bashful about engaging, we always made the care available at whatever cost point or free, whatever it was necessary. With this knowledge, you can't not provide it. I mean, when you know it and they need it, you know you have to provide it.
Well, Chris, let's talk about the results that you're seeing. So you've been doing this less time, about half the time of Dalton, and I'm curious, as you um, as you treated your first few patients, what were some of the results you saw? And since then, what kind of results are you seeing?
Well, I'll first to say, if it wasn't for Dalton's guidance, I wouldn't be this far along this quickly. So thank you, Dalton.
You're welcome.
I think I called you, it could be a half dozen times by now, but without a doubt, I tell my patients every week, I said, next week I'm going to know something new. And so whatever I said today, I reserve the right to change my mind, because the learning curve on this it's staggering. And it's turned out to be the case. So my first patient was a family friend that I actually grew up with in the sailing world. And he had already lost an eye to GA. And he is a retired naval aviator, navigator. And so his right eye, as you'll see here in a little bit with some images, has a pretty severe central GA lesion. Remarkably, he sees a 20/50 out of it, but it's a crummy 20/50. It's not anything you would want to let him drive with. The good news is his left eye was in moderate dry disease. He had no GA lesions. And he came to me a year ago before I had the machine. And I said, well, you've been on AREDS 2, and you've been getting injections for the GA in your right eye. He says, well, how long do I have? When is the other eye going to fall? And I have to say, I've spent my career explaining to patients that you're on a pathway to injections. And if there's anything we can do to displace that date so that you age faster than your eye, or AMD, then that's the miracle we're all looking for. So I started him on MacuHealth Plus at that point, and I was able to get my machine in training done in October. He was our first case in November. And what's amazing is that, just like Dalton referred to, some of these drusen, especially in the giant drusen department, disappear. And then that's the pathway to GA. And so what's remarkable is I've seen those changes on MacuHealth as well. And so he was basically soaked for about 5 months in MacuHealth. And then we started the pathway on photobiomodulation in November. And then we just did all of his 10-session protocol, 8 in a row, once a week. And then a month later, number 9, a month later, number 10. And then 2 weeks later, I go ahead and do my retina review. And the results of the drusen volume reduction are dramatic. And so it's like Dalton told me that I'm supposed to expect one in every other case to get better. And I don't know if that was you setting me up to make sure my expectations weren't very high, or if that's your experience. I don't know which of the two it is, but in our experience, because all of our patients, we didn't know this until May 1st when I was at a meeting in Nashville, all of our patients have benefited physically. We can actually see a physical retinal benefit in every single case. So we're still at 100%, some more than others, no doubt. But the only thing I'm doing different is I'm using MacuHealth on every single case. And remarkably, Dalton, because I bought that first machine and delivered in October, so I'm doing this in the Friday Harbor Clinic, and then I'm starting to see the results of this. February, I think it was early March, and I said, I can't do this in one clinic and not do it in the other. I even had a woman offer to buy the second machine. So so I bought the second machine. The second machine has a different protocol, which I can show you, than the first machine. But all the patients are on MacuHealth, every one of them. And the results are no different. So I'm having the same success on both protocols in both offices. And so it's the privilege of all time to be able to offer this. And patients say to me daily, says, White, you got gray hair. You should retire. Throw in the towel. And I said, at a time like this, are you crazy?
Cool. Yeah, so that's awesome. What a great position, Chris, to be on the front lines of this. Well,
sure.
let's get into practical stuff. So, Dalton, what is how often you mentioned you start seeing results in about 3 months. Both of you kind of mentioned that. So what is the protocol, Dalton, for you in the first 3 months that you're following? And you said you adapted some of the studies, and that you've experimented with the protocol. So what have you come up with, and what does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this has been something that's been a progression that we noticed whenever because when we started after this, after the clinical trials had been published, there really wasn't like an instruction manual on how to kind of offer this to patients. And so when we had started building this, we tried to replicate things as closely to the established research as possible. And as we had developed, we had initially started offering this to patients either once a week or twice a week. And we had steered them initially into having multiple treatments done in a single week if they had the opportunity for. And after we had had about 10 or 15 patients in each group that went through, we started to compare the notes and find out, was this something that we were seeing benefits and changes across the way? And at the time when we saw twice a week patients, we didn't really see a difference and a benefit and that was noticeable over the top of what we were seeing in our once a week patient groups. And so as we continued doing just one treatment a week for these retinal patients, we then started to see patients at the end of 8 or 9 of these visits that started to say, well, what do we want to do now? And at that time, we had initially decided that having some form of maintenance wouldn't be a bad idea. And that was just kind of a translation between research care and clinical care. Because in research, you want to be able to turn something on and see an improvement, and then turn it off and see a decline, and then turn it back on and see the improvement again. And so the light site trials and all of the other ones that were previous were based off of research developments. And so we said if there was a way of being able to add some form of maintenance, that was the once a month visits that we had whenever we offered those to patients. And so the way that we have that our kind of protocol, I guess, or setup now that we have was one treatment a week for about 8 weeks, and then one treatment a month for a period of 2 months. And that made it to where we ended up having a cycle of every 4 months we would see the patient back, and we would go over the results and basically decide at that point, do we want to continue how we have been the last 4 months, repeat that cycle again, or do we want to switch gears and go into something that we want to just go into long-term maintenance, if you will. And the nature of it actually ended up kind of developing based off how the patients were responding in those moments, and which ended up the pathways of what we offer patients now is more of the evidence of saying the patients that were in your position previously ended up kind of going in one of these two directions. Which one do you feel like would line up more with your goals in the moment? And it kind of lets patients now either have a more aggressive path of repeating that treatment cycle, or going more of a conservative approach and just having a monthly long-term maintenance in place. The interesting thing that we saw, though, is that we ended up having patients that would go through treatments for a full year of just doing once a month visits, and they would still show up at their yearly visit and have statistical and dramatic, significant improvements in the back of their retina. And so I think one of the interesting notes that we'll see with this long term is that I don't really think that you have to be super aggressive with this type of treatment. I think it is something that once you have given that retina the ability to actually function in a higher state, you kind of let the retina do what it's always done the entire course of time up until that point. You let it function at its best and you watch the results that take place. But now, whenever it's something that we see Drews in that come into clinic, we consider this of being, is this stressed yet recoverable? And I think that's the first time that we've really ever looked at drusen as having an ability of being actually, modified or modulated in any way. If it's something that we could think of early drusenoid changes or alteration within the RPE as something that says these are the earliest signs that are showing stress in the back of your retina. And because of that, we can introduce it so that hopefully you aren't having to ever lose vision because of a disease that only robs of vision. It never improves over time. So if it's something that we can see these cases and actually intervene in an earlier sense, I do think that this opens up the opportunity of actually treating preventatively and opening the doors up for patients that are saying, I always want to do anything that prevents me from having the sight that my grandparent went through, or my mother lost their vision, or my father had this case and they lost their sight because of that, or I don't want any injections in my eyes. What can I do to avoid that? I think these are relative answers that we have all answered every single week in clinic ever since kind of the supplements even ended up entering that stage. And so now it's just happens to be one of the first times that they're asking, is there anything else I can do? And we happen to have an answer for it and says, yes, there actually may be something that we can talk about and let's go ahead and have a discussion about. And so
Okay.
I think that that's a really cool thing now.
Yeah, and so just summarize it for me. If I am a typical patient walking into your clinic and I have, and I want to be a little bit more aggressive about how I take care of my AMD because of this um, new treatment option that I have. How many times am I going to see you, and uh, over the course of what period of time?
Sure. If you're early, for example, or I would even say intermediate at that case, we're going to do, again, a total of the 10 visits of what we've done now naturally for everyone else. We do the first 2 months, we are doing once a week. And the last 2 months, we're doing once a month. But depending on if it's something that you're wanting to repeat that cycle, maybe once or twice. But the end up goal that I have with everybody is to find the fewest number of treatments that it takes to maintain what you've gained, if you will. And so in our case too, is if we can make that to where we can have the fewest number long term, like that long term goal is to say, I want the fewest number so that I never lose functional vision with this. That end number is going to be a lot less than where we're starting from. But if we can go year over year without seeing a decline in that vision, I'd still think it's an incredible success in this place.
So Dalton, is it typical? I'm trying to nail you down to a number. Sorry.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So is it like so the first 3 months we're going to do 10 treatments.
Okay.
If I need to be more
I get
aggressive
you.
in the future, I'll do another round of 10 treatments. But if I'm more on what you call maintenance, am I coming back every month? Is that what I'm
Yeah,
doing?
I think maintenance. I think long-term maintenance of maybe once a month, once every 4 to 6 weeks, something like that is fair. So for in that example, I see what you mean. So for the first 4 months, I would see you a total of 10 visits. And then maybe on the last 8 months of that year, maybe see you once a month on the early side. But if it was someone that was intermediate, no geographic atrophy, for example, then we may end up repeating that first 4 months an additional one or two times in that year. So on the low end of it, you may only have a total of 18 visits a year. On the high end of it, you may have a total of 30 visits if it's something that they have intermediate macular degeneration for sure.
And those visits take how much time for you or your staff?
It takes a total of about somewhere between 12 to 18 minutes, somewhere in that range, depending on if you're treating that part. And it's all something that you can do a lot of this hands free. This isn't something that you have to have a high amount of oversight when it comes to monitoring this.
So a tech can set somebody up
Yeah,
for
easily.
like you don't do any of these treatments yourself, right? The tech
No.
does.
So for the Medicare side of things, if you are billing to Medicare, there is a caveat that says the provider has to be the one that presses the button. But it is something that from all the other kind of perspectives in that case, having this be a tech run procedure long term will be the way of how this is implemented.
Okay, good. Chris, tell me about your protocol. If I'm coming into your clinic and I have AMD, how many times am I going to see you between now and the end of the year, in the first year, and then maybe in the second year?
Right. So, high risk cases will go through that 10 visit protocol multiple times in a row. So, I have one patient who is high risk GA. She developed an early GA lesion in one eye, and we have reversed the early GA lesion. And I've actually seen that about a half dozen times. So, that's something I didn't expect to see happen. For the most part, most of our patients that are not in the high risk, less than 3 to 5 years from injection, will do the 10 visits, and then it's once a month until I see something that appears to be new or new risk factors. If they remain stable or continue to improve, it'd be once a month thereafter.
So you're similar, basically 18 for a lower risk patient. It's 18 in the first year, and then probably 12 a year, unless you see something happening,
Correct.
and they got to go through another protocol of 10.
I just, it's amazing. Dalton referred to his local retinologist. So I have about 9 retinologists that I work with, and they know that we're involved in this. And I just had a patient go to the retinologist and ask whether or not it was okay to do this. And the retinologist says, well, 2 things. We trust Dr. White immensely. We've worked with him for a long time, and photobiomodulation can't hurt you. So bottom line is get it done and do it quickly. All the retinologists that I work with are on board with this 100%. And I just heard last week that somebody is involved in a slightly different technology, and they're treating this patient 4 times a week. And so the retinologist told my patient, he says, well, "Are you sure once a week's going to be okay? We're noticing that this one practice is doing this 4 times a week." And I have not a lick of evidence that suggests that that's the right move. But I have to say that I haven't ever gotten anybody. And we started out 2 or 3 times a week until I spoke
Mhm.
to Dalton. He says, look, Skip, let's say they don't come from out of the county. We still think once a week is just as beneficial as anything more than that. And I don't have any evidence to the otherwise. But also, the once a week, not only is it easy to schedule and manage clinically, and it's easy for the patient, same time, same day, um, it works. And so I don't have any reason to do anything different at this point.
So we're gonna go on break for a second, and when we come back from break, we're going to talk about the economics, and then maybe we'll get to a little bit of show and tell towards the end of the show for those folks watching this on YouTube, so they may be able to see some of your images and a little bit of story time. So we'll be right back here on the Power Hour.
Looking to expand what's possible in your practice? MD Elite is helping practices across the vision industry grow with advanced IPL, RF, and photobiomodulation therapy technologies designed for today's modern practice. And now, MD Elite is proud to introduce the OcuLift protocol, a comprehensive approach combining technologies designed to support the ocular surface while delivering skin rejuvenation around the eyes. Every MD Elite device is backed by a 2-year warranty with no click fees and no required consumables, giving you more control over your investment and your practice. Ready to learn more? Go to mdelite.com or call the number in the show notes of this episode to reach a product specialist. Mention the Power Practice and receive $2,500 off any MD Elite device just for listening. MD Elite, technology built for vision, partnership built for growth.
All right, and we're back in the Power Hour. Dr. Chris White, Dr. Dalton Brothers. So I heard each of you say that the patient's going to see you at least 18 times in the first year, and then probably 12 times or more for the, I guess, sort of in for the future, a year every year. Okay, so let's talk about the from a business standpoint what this means. Um, so Dalton, question for you: what's the industry average, and what are you guys charging, and like how much? And is that there? You mentioned Medicare multiple times. What's the Medicare reimbursement situation like? Is it the same everywhere? Let's just give me a little bit of background.
Yeah, of course. I think in our case, this is something that there really wasn't much of an industry standard, I guess, whenever we first started. And I don't know how much of an impact we've had on kind of setting that. If so, I'm sorry if we set it too low for anybody. But the thing that we had is we tried to make this accessible for as many patients as possible. And whenever we started offering this, because we didn't have any consumables with our device, we didn't have any click fees that we had to continue with, it was something that we really were able to offer this at a point where the price really was able to be affordable for a lot of the patients. And so whenever we had originally set our price, we had set it between $60 and $75 for a single, for the treatment each time that we would do this. Now, since then, this was before we ended up ever having any Medicare reimbursement or anything that we could submit to medical payers for that purpose. But in that case, it was something that we found that having $60 a treatment in our own case was affordable for the area that we were at. And being in the middle of the Midwest, having a lot of farmers, having a lot of middle class, it was something that we didn't want to make this to where it was something that the patients all of a sudden had this hope and then felt like it was something that was out of reach. Now, whenever we talk with clinics about, kind of helping to kind of figure out what that price kind of looks like for where they're at, I think it's somewhere between the farther that you go out towards coastal regions, having that number 85, 100, 115, 120, 100 and whatever that looks like, the patient base that you're working with, and at that part of it, what that cost of living and what that looks like on those procedures. But not having to have any click fees or any of those consumables made it to where the price could really be exactly what you wanted it to be, and you could meet the patient where they were at in that case. Now, the
Was that
reimbursement,
important in your device selection, is the not having click fees?
100%, yeah. And that was made it to where the important selections that we had is that we didn't want to make it to where there was only one, basically only one thing that it could do. And I think that this was maybe some of the issues that certain providers had whenever they were looking at devices, like some of the units that came out for the light site trials, particularly, was that they had click fees and that they also could only function in one way. In our own clinic, we have multiple different protocols that we're treating anterior, posterior, neurologic, all of these conditions, that having the ability to transform and switch gears and treat all of these different patients was paramount for us, because not every patient's always going to present in the same one size fits all approach. And so being able to change the settings, modify the intensity, change the amount of time that patient was sitting under there was really, if that wouldn't have been there, it wouldn't have ever been a choice that ended up in my clinic to begin with. But being able to make this to where they could offer this for patients and we could find them and meet them where they're at was the next big portion for us. I think the part that's kind of the hard thing to stomach is that having click fees is optional on all these devices. Now, in the MD Elite device that we have, I have management cards that sit in my front desk that have all of the key cards that I could use if I was to rent this device out to a neighboring clinic and just wanted to rent this out for the purchase of however many minutes they wanted to use, and I could turn click fees on at a moment, which it's something that seeing that is always kind of an interesting thing when you see certain devices kind of build a business model out of those things. But outside of all of this, we wanted to make this to where we could have the patient success this as much as possible. And so now what we've offered now with being able to have Medicare reimbursements is that we've been somewhere between, $150, $200 per eye per session that would have qualified for the light site trials had they been given the opportunity. And so as long as the patient qualified based on visual acuity and the age and the presentation of drusen, it was something that they had the opportunity for us to bill Medicare instead. And that's been something that's been you can do the quick math to see that that's a very big, substantial income in a lot of practices now.
Well, and is it okay if I do your quick math for you? Because
Of course.
I've been keeping track of the numbers you said. You said you have about 200 patients in treatment. You said that your patients come in anywhere between 18 and 30 times a year. So I'm going to pick a average of 22 to be on the low side. And then you said that your cash price is 60, but your Medicare reimbursement's 150 to more, to
200, yeah.
200. So I'm going to pick $100 times treatment. And so 200 patients times 22 treatments a year times $100 works out to $440,000. And the cost on that is 10 minutes of a text time. And I understand in the Medicare situation, you got to push the button. So I understand that's a commitment, Dalton.
It's not that big a one, man.
But to me, like you're giving patients hope where there was none. And how many of those 200 patients are improving or at least not getting worse?
So in the category of not getting worse, that percentage is, I would say, high 70, 80% plus in that category. I think it's hard time because we always want to view the drusen disappearing and all of these other big kind of retinal changes, because on the front end of it, those are the sexy things, right? That's the part where you show the picture before and after and it's there and it's not there and it's like, oh, this is an incredible thing. But I had a conversation with a gentleman actually a few hours ago, and he was in here for his 8-month visit, and whenever I was having that part with, it was saying, your right eye has improved. Your right eye improved very quickly. Actually, you can see these large fields where these drusen were present, and now they're no longer there. Those confluent areas of drusen, they've changed. But your left eye, it seems that the drusen are still present. And he got kind of bummed for a second, but I was like, but I want to put this in perspective, is that in the entire almost year that we've been doing this, your left eye hasn't gotten worse. Not even a single pixel out of place is worse than where it was last year. And he's like, I never really thought about that. But I said, if it's something that we've done this now, I said, we've hit the pause button essentially on your body's process that was only going in one direction before. And I said, if all that we gained in that left eye was making a full year of it not getting worse, I said, I still think that's an incredible win in my books. Now, it's something that maybe not changed as much as your right one did, but I'd say that's something that seeing a drusen change is an incredible thing, but seeing an eye not get worse year over year and finally being able to turn a light on and stop this, I think that's an incredible, powerful thing if we can
Yeah.
be okay with that metric of success, right?
And what about visual acuity? How quickly after you start a patient on this treatment does visual acuity improve, and for what percentage of patients?
Yeah, so visual acuity is kind of a different thing. And I think one of the things that is difficult to kind of manage and really tease out from some of these clinical studies is that there's two different types of improvement we've seen. There are functional improvements and there are structural improvements. There are the ones that only improve when the drusen disappears. Like in my mom's case, she went from 2030 to 2020, but it took 6 months of doing this. But I've had other patients improve lines of letters in only a handful of weeks without having changes in drusen, but it was something because they had functional changes that got improved whenever we turned this light on. And I think that there's a few different mechanisms that happen in that case, but we've had patients that improved functionally, but it wasn't until the drusen disappeared that we had like really the fullness of how much improvement was on the table. And so in our case, we found out that there are less about the acuity changes and more about the intangibles. So we may have had not as many that said, I see lines better on the chart, but there's a vast number of them that say, I see colors better. I see better in low light. I can read better. I actually navigate in my environment better. We had a gentleman that whenever we first started was, for example, he was 87 years old and he got sent over from the retina specialist. He was one of the first patients that we did this with. And whenever he came over, he had central geographic atrophy widespread in both eyes. And when I asked him, I said, can you just explain to me what you see with your vision? He says, I see dogs in my vision at my feet that aren't there. And I see beams of light coming from people's clothes that are not there. It's not normal. I mean, it's very distracting. And so I'm sitting here and I'm listening to him describe his vision, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with this guy? Like, there's not an instruction manual. There's no way this patient wouldn't have qualified for this study at all. Like, what are we going to do? And so I said, well, let's try. She sent you over. Let's see what happens. And so after 3 or 4 treatments, I asked him again. I said, tell me a little bit. Are you noticing any change in your vision? I really wasn't trying to bait him out or anything. I just wanted to see, do you notice a difference? And he said, I don't see the dogs in my vision anymore. The dogs are gone and everyone has normal clothes. So I guess this is working. And we joked about it for a minute in clinic because I said, I don't know if you know this, but at 2025, I don't know of anyone that's wearing normal clothes anymore. Like not that I don't even know if that's improved your vision because I don't know how well the standard is. But then we got to thinking and said, okay, this 87-year-old now no longer sees something that's a very potential fall hazard in this life. And when we looked at that, what he was describing was Charles Bonnet issues. And that's where basically the brain fills in pieces of information that weren't there, trying to kind of fix a short circuit, if you will. And when we removed the dogs in his vision, we'll never know the path that we didn't take, but we very well might have extended this 87-year-old's life because we removed a fall risk from him potentially falling and breaking a hip and changing the trajectory of the remainder of his life in a very dramatic, sudden way. Now, we've done that in 4 different times. We've had a total of 4 patients either have partial or full resolution of their Charles Bonnet issues. And I didn't even know that was fixable. I didn't know that I didn't know any of that was happening. Now, his geographic atrophy, at least in the cases that we had, that wasn't going to be something that all of a sudden the atrophied lesions at least in his case, it wasn't like we were going to return them back to the healthy retina they were 20 years ago. But there was still a functional improvement that took place in his vision that, even though it didn't show up on an acuity chart, was certainly by all means life changing. And he still comes into the clinic. It was kind of funny though, because after all of the treatments that he's done, all of the sunspots on his bald head have now disappeared on the front half of his face. And now he jokes about coming in and sitting backwards in the device a couple times just to kind of balance out the back of his bald head. But
Well, but
we have,
that's a very powerful story, man. Like I'm listening to you tell that, and I understand that vision is such an important part of life, but like it really hits home because like you really like legitimately, if this guy didn't fall, and if this guy like you really, I mean, that's more time with his family. You've extended his like it's not just quality of life; it's literally you've extended his life. That's incredible.
yeah, there's a pretty good chance of it. And I think that's kind of the stories that when we look at, that's the part where we say, well, is this making a really big difference? And this is kind of why we joined it. It was something that I feel like we've all had this handicap with when it came to macular degeneration, because there was always the supplements, the good, better, the best, the categories, the tier list that we would always kind of run. And maybe there was some alternative options that we had that really just weren't mainstream and a part of it. But this is now a capability that we have at our fingertips to be able to actually intervene in a lot of these patients and see quality of life improvements on a way that we've never really had access to before. And I think that's just one of the coolest things about this entire therapy. And I'm honored to be at it's kind of like the part where people are asking questions about it, because this has been one of the most dramatic, life-changing, career-changing opportunities. And even just seeing in the changes that we've had in my mom's own case has been, it's quite strange to think about having such a capstone achievement so early on in my career, of being able to see a patient's vision change in the way it has, but also being in my mom's own case of actually seeing the type of improvements that have happened there. And that's something that whenever we get to the part of being able to kind of show those cases here, it's going to be something that I'm really excited to kind of show those for you and see those
Yeah,
for the viewers that are listening, seeing them actually kind of join back this later and be like, I want to see what he was talking about, because that sounded pretty crazy.
yeah. We're gonna get there shortly. I just wanted to get Chris's opinion. Chris, back to the economics of this thing.
Mhm.
So you got 40 to 50 patients on this thing right now,
Yep,
and what do you charge?
150.
Okay, and what's the pushback that you get from patients when you present this? Is there any pushback?
So I've probably taken my first couple of patients. I said, I just want to do this and see how it goes. I'll do it for free. I won't charge you anything, I promise. And then my confidence went up pretty quick. And so anybody that feels that it's out of reach, we find a way to put it back in reach. So nobody's ever been denied care. So it's about keeping that retina where it's at or better, and buying time so that they can age faster than their eye. And so it's 100% accessible. I would say that the number of times where I've had to reduce the fee might be a dozen. And that was early on. And I think part of that had to do with my confidence or lack thereof. Today, it doesn't seem to be a pushback. Um, the patients will say, those who haven't had an injection at all yet will say, what, an injection in my eye? Are you out of your mind? And then the other part to this is that, you can take anything you want from me, but not my vision. So I'll give up my hearing, I'll give up an arm, but not my eyes. And so I probably could have charged $300 a service and may have had a very similar outcome. But the machines, we're not on a click fee mechanism either, and the machines pay for themselves several times in a month, and it easily takes care of the additional staff that we assign to this. And so to be able to provide this opportunity and stay ahead of it financially, I don't remember the last time we ran into a situation like this. So to me, it's a no-brainer for us, and it's a no-brainer for the patient.
Well, and it's interesting because this is just going to keep adding up as an annuity for both of you guys, right?
Sure,
Because
it's true.
it's like you're adding a new patient. Every time you add a new patient, that's a minimum of 18 treatments in the first year. And then it's a lifetime of 12 treatments 12 treatments a year. And as long as you're relatively early to the party, where like not everybody is doing this yet, the and I think I heard both of you say that you're getting referrals from retina doctors to do this. But so it's like it's pretty incredible from that vantage point. But if I think about, I talk about this concept a lot, which is the lifetime value of a patient. This is a highly loyal patient that's coming into your office every single month. They're certainly not going to miss their annual eye exam. They're probably not going to miss buying glasses or a product from you. And they're definitely not going to miss a treatment when it looks like you're really, really helping them. And so and even to that point, what Dalton said which is we're not seeing a decline, which is in itself a win. And so,
Exactly.
and I think, again, if I do the math and I say, hey, first year for you, Chris, based off of, if it's okay if I count your money for a moment, first year, your patient is spending somewhere between $3,000 and $4,500 a year. And that's the first year. And then in the second year, at a very minimum, they're spending $1,800 in that second year, and that's if there's no abnormalities and if there's nothing else you want to treat. So like this is a really, really, really meaningful thing to consider from the financial health of the practice. But as both of you have told some stories, and like I think that now I got to look at some images, but as both of you have told some stories, this is also a pretty incredible thing from a patient standpoint. So just going to ask you, Chris, I heard a couple of Dalton stories. Like, what kind of patient feedback are you getting?
So the average age of our patients is 72 years old. So when a commercial carrier left the county, San Juan County, our Friday Harbor office average age went up to like 77 years old. And so these folks, if you think about what it's like to live on an island, one island has an emergency room, the other one does not. And so as these folks age, the biggest concern they have is their independence, their ability to drive. How long can they live on their own without having family ask, would you move to Joplin so we can take care of you, versus staying in their home here in the San Juans. And I said, well, Joplin's going to be safe, but nowhere else will be. And their comment is, look, I've been here on the island for 25 years. We retired here. This was our plan. And my favorite crack up is, who would have thunk that you would have moved to an island where there would be a service that you didn't know you were going to need that was going to extend your independence in this place you chose to live? And so that's the magic button. So this case we'll present here a little bit. He's a pilot.
Pull it up, Chris. But go ahead.
Yeah,
Just pull
I have like 4,000 hours of flight, and us pilot people are control freaks. So the last guy he wants to give up is he doesn't want to lose his ability to drive. And in the last 12 months, we've made that possible. And let me hit the share button here. I'll show you this one. So here's a short little presentation, which I know is going to grow as I continue to share this discussion with other practitioners that are now calling me Dalton. So this is awesome. It's a privilege. So so we have the MD Elite Infinity Pro, and this whole thing came about from the IPL space. And our recipe is this instrument. The fact that it has no click fees and it has no reusables is one of the attractions to it. MacuHealth Plus is the other part to this recipe, making sure that we take the time to educate, which has totally changed my schedule. And you folks are able to see this, are you?
Yeah, we can see it.
Good, yeah. Beautiful. So I've also learned that patients that suffer GI stress, those patients need to be managed immediately, and frequently they have not. And when you get their GI under control, they respond to photobiomodulation dramatically differently. So in the standard recommendations, proper diet, UV, lifestyle, cholesterol management are all on the table. So, if they do their part, then I can help make our part work better. I don't know if there's anybody else other than our clinics that have two instruments that are of different versions. And while I was given the ability to convert the first instrument to the second protocol, I decided to leave them the same as they were delivered from the manufacturer, so I could tell whether or not the second protocol was better than the first or vice versa. And it's turned out that it's been the same in both. So if I go, so the first protocol looks like this, and the second protocol, the last cycle was removed, and it's a short difference. This is the product that we're using to sort of bathe the retina. And I put patients on this the moment they're in mild to moderate. And our experience with this in MacuHealth is that when we see any autofluorescence, positive autofluorescence at all, we start this and begin the process of reversing that. So this is the case of the 77-year-old white male that was the naval aviator. And he came to me on the AREDS tube formula last June. He was our first patient, and he actually was our first patient before we even had the machine. So his right eye, remarkably, had been 20/50 and his left eye 20/40 corrected. So he'll tell you that some of the words on signs is a bit of a challenge. He doesn't drive at night, but he's quite comfortable driving in the day in areas that he's familiar with. He had already been receiving injections for geographic atrophy in the right eye only. And on that visit, we took all of his baseline imaging and started him on MacuHealth Plus. And then about 5 months later, we introduced him to the photobiomodulation. Now, remember, I don't have anything to lose with this case. He was only my dad's best friend, right? I probably met him when I was about 12 years old in the sailing environment. And I thought, man, if I blow the first case and it's this person, everybody in the sailing community that knows the both of us is going to know who done it. And so this turned out to be a pretty big deal.
No pressure, yeah.
Yeah, no pressure. So this, I thought this slide was super interesting because we've had quite a few instances. And this is the patient's left eye, of course. The right eye's got a pretty large atrophy, GA lesion, which you'll see in a moment. But, 5 months of MacuHealth Plus before we initiated the first triple LT, I thought this was a super important slide. I have so much OCT data. It goes all the way back to this 2015 with the same instrument with updated software. So I have comparative data from 2015 all the way to date in patients we've seen for that time period. So it's important to know what the change was from baseline to before the first treatment. And then looking at pre-first treatment to post-treatment and those differences, and getting these OCT addresses. There's only like 140 slides on this OCT, and you got to match them up just right. And if the fixation is slightly different on one slide to another, you have to go back and look at the physical attributes of the retina to, I don't know if you can see me enlarge this. I hope you can. Mm-hmm. Okay. So sometimes it's not just the address over here that's the case. Sometimes it's the physical characteristics of the lesions in the retina that you use to actually ensure that you're comparing apples to apples and you're not giving yourself a false sense of success. So in this case, the fixation was very similar in the before and afters. And there's a lot of characteristics here that you can see that are similar. And boy, Dalton, I don't know about you, but I don't have time to look at 140 slides, and I don't have time to look at the what's going on way out here in the periphery. So all my cases and all my what I refer to as improvement are referenced inside the 500 microns of the fovea, because that's where we see our best, right? So for you, Eugene, if it's way out here in the side, it's peripheral vision, it's important. But in this foveal depression, that's where the action is for how well a patient's acuity is going to be, how the color vision is going to be, and how well they're going to do at nighttime, or daytime color vision. So this is MacuHealth alone. So then we go 6 months later, and this is what happens with MacuHealth and photobiomodulation. So when I saw this, now remember, this is patient essentially number one for me. And so I wasn't expecting this, but I have to tell you that I was snooping at treatment number 4, and then I was snooping at treatment number 8 because I couldn't stand not to look. And Dalton was telling me, don't even think about it. The soonest you're going to see anything is going to be at session number 8. And so I said, I cannot help it. So I kind of kept a little bit of a secret at session number 4. I started to see some changes. I couldn't prove that it was, was it the MacuHealth? Was it the photobiomodulation? What was it? I said, wow, this is interesting. I'm going to stay tuned. But look how much smoother this retina is. And I'm sure Dalton's seen many cases like this. But this was my first one. And essentially I told the patient, I says, in my hands, that's probably the best, most remarkable photo I have in all my library of all the images I've collected over the years.
10 sessions, 3 months, 4 months?
Correct. So this is this is shot in June. And because he had to take a ferry boat to get to me, and the ferry system in Washington State isn't the most up-to-date thing quite yet. They're working on it. He didn't exactly make all of his appointments, but for the most part, he got through the total protocol. And this image was shot a month after his last photobiomodulation session. And so, if anybody is looking for physical evidence and validity, I expect to be peer-reviewed by making a statement like this, and I've gone pretty far out of my way to make sure that I can defend my results. This is the autofluorescence imaging baseline. And if you look to the left over here, Eugene, you'll see this is his right eye. So everything in eye care is backwards. And you'll notice that he's already got some early GA lesions, and that's these black lesions right here. So we typically feel that any of this bright area right there is retina under stress, and these black areas is basically retina that has died. It can't be recovered. Now you look at his left eye, and you look at the amount of autofluorescence over here. It's pretty dramatic. So when I saw him on day 1, and I said, well, in my book, AREDS 2 is about 25 times less effective than what I think I'm using. I said, the first thing we're going to do is treat you beyond the standard of care and put you on MacuHealth. And as soon as I get the machine up and I'm trained on it, you're going to be patient number 1 through the protocol. So then here it is. So this is June of this year. This is essentially a year later. Remember, he's been treated for GA with injections in his right eye the entire time. And if you look at his left eye, I'm a nitpicker, so that's what I do all day is split hair. But, I kind of feel like maybe there's a couple little GA lesions forming there, but I don't see anything there that would cause a retinologist to inject that left eye. So the key to this one is pretty cool. Let's see if I can do this. Sure, I can. That's great. So remarkably, his right eye is still 20/50, which is hard to believe, but he's probably catching the acuity right on the edge of the superior portion of that GA lesion in the right eye. And his left eye is still 20/40. However, the patient will tell you, in this patient, he doesn't say anything to please me, I assure you. He's a competitor. And he says, look, I can tell you that my left eye is no worse in 12 months. He says, but I can tell you that the lesion in my right eye is a lot bigger in 12 months. He says, whatever you're doing, you're holding my left eye in check. I can still be a driver. If I have to take care of my wife, if she comes down with a medical, I can be her caregiver. And when I do these BVAs here, Dalton, I go back over and make sure that the correction that he's wearing is the best correction. And so I compare before and after with the same script, but I also go back and re-refract these for BVA to make sure that if the spectacle RX is actually changed and there's an improvement in acuity, we're going to find it. So most importantly, I totally anticipate this left eye is probably going to come in. I could kind of tell that he was knocking on 2030's door. And if we stay on track with this, I would not be surprised if this left eye doesn't knock on 2030 plus. So his comment to me was, okay, look, am I going to lose my license? And so I put up FCBDE. Everybody in our world knows that's 2040, and he can see it with ease instead of kind of reading it backwards to sort of pull it off. He can read it either direction, and he'll tell you that his confidence daytime driving has improved dramatically, and he doesn't see the beginning of the end in his left eye like he knows is happening in his right eye. So,
wow. And this is, Chris, you said this is pretty representative of the patient population you're seeing.
No doubt about it. I see 10 cases a day. I see at least 10 AMDs a day at one level or another. I also see about 8 to 10 glaucomas a day.
And in terms of the improvement that you're seeing, this is also representative.
No doubt. I did not expect to have this type of an outcome. And I was at a meeting in Nashville, as I said earlier in May, and I was sharing this results with the MacuHealth people and the AMD Elite people. And Dalton and Dr. Jackson both said to me, one on every other, that's what you're going to get. And when I refer to as a success, I agree with Dalton. If you're not worse, you're better, because you should be worse by now. But I'm looking for physical improvement in the OCT findings. And if I don't have it, then it's either the same or it's worse or it's better. It's one of those three. And like Dalton said, folks that have mac degen and those who care for these patients need to tell the patient, your eye has only one plan, and that's to get worse. That's all it wants to do. And for us to have an opportunity to interrupt that and start to move the time clock in reverse to your first injection and maybe never, it's a miracle. It's a miracle.
That's so cool.
Who would have thunk? So we concentrate on the foveal zone, and that's how we make our judgments for better, worse, or the same. My two worst patients have terrible GI problems, and neither one of them are worse. I can show mild attributes that are improvements, but they are in it for the long haul, and they totally get it. So pretty cool stuff. And
that's
like
great.
I say, what a privilege to be in this position.
Yeah, that's great, Chris. Thanks for the detail that you walked through that with. Dalton, let's do a quick case on your end before we wrap up. So tell me about this patient.
Yeah, so this is my mom, and this is one of those, again, that was one of my first patients, and like Chris's, if it was something that he was going to hear anything negative about it, I was going to hear negative about this one. So, you have to be able to kind of take care of it, right? And so this was her right eye. You can see kind of like in the timestamps here, we had started her treatment December 12th, 2024, and it was one of the first ones that we had done this with. And then right before her birthday that year, it was the first time that we actually saw the first drusen change in her right eye. And when you look at the photos, you can see this tiny little blinking light whenever it flickers back and forth. And that was the first little change that we looked at it, and we all looked at each other in the room and we were like, oh my God, there's actually something to this. This is incredible. And so now there was a drusen that was adjacent to it. And at 6 months, we didn't really understand what was happening at 3. But when we looked at it then at 6 months, this is the part whenever I'm actually showing patients in clinic, there's a very dramatic difference that was noticeable at this point in time. We had about, I'd say maybe 6 or 7 drusen that were all disappeared essentially at this point at 6 months. This was also at the point, both right and left eye, that she actually had an improvement in this case. Now, there was a drusen that was off to the left side, if it's something that you're ever looking at this. And this actually goes through some of the stages of what we've since referred to as drusen softening. It refers to the stages by which a drusen disappears. And the way that I can think about it is that it's like putting hardened butter in a hot skillet. where you actually see these drusen will shrink down centrally and they can actually expand horizontally. And so the edges actually look a little fluffy whenever you're looking at them from the top down view. But as those edges start to contract, when you look at it here at 9 months, one of the things that you'll actually see is that the edges start to contract. And then all of a sudden on that drusen, you actually see it contract where now it's all just back to that central little area where it was before, much smaller than it was. I'd say in that case, that drusen was down maybe about 40 to 50% by this point at 9 months now. And at this part here, whenever we looked at it, then even just a few months later, almost 1 year to date now was the photos that we had here at the 12-month now. You could see that drusen had actually finished its complete cycle and it had actually disappeared at this point. And as far as we can tell, the good thing about this, and this is the big interesting thing, is that having no geographic atrophy show up in a spot where a drusen once was in either right or left eye has been one of the mainstays of seeing improvement that's happened in her vision over this period of time. I think it's also important to kind of show that it's something that it's hard to kind of measure how where we're at in this stages when we're basing it off of drusen disappearing, because there was another drusen that's right here in the center of that image that actually didn't even disappear until another 6 months later. And so in some cases, we had some that were disappearing at 3, some 6, some 9, some 12, some 15, some 18, and some are still changing even yet, where we're at here coming up almost on 21 months from the time that we had started this original treatment for her. But when we looked at it now comparing on the left eye, this was something that was kind of a different story, because at the time whenever we looked at it, had we not had that little blinking drusen that disappeared in the middle of that right eye, I don't know if we would even be having the conversation to the extent that we are right now, because the left eye really didn't have anything noticeable. There was an artifact up in the top half of the retina. There was, maybe if you're being super picky, the smallest change centrally. And if you look down on the bottom half, the drusen actually looked worse. At this time, we didn't realize that it was undergoing drusen softening at the time of what we had called. But it wasn't really until we looked at it now 3 months later, and at 6 months now, this is where that drusen in the lower half of the retina was gone. The drusen in the center of that retina was gone. And there were actually changes that were happening on a large constellation of drusen over on the temporal side of that macula. Now, again, in the 6 month time frame, her vision had actually improved from 2030 to 2020 at this point. She was kind of hesitant to tell us about it because she didn't want to disappoint us. But she's like, I'd been able to tell for a little while that my vision was actually improving. I didn't want to kind of get the cart in front of the horse, if you will. Then at 9 months and 12 months and 15 and all the rest, that constellation of drusen started to change and change its appearance month after month after month of undergoing these treatments. Now, the last one that we showed here, you could actually see an entire ridge that had formed between those, and it separated between kind of like the superior half of it, and then the lower third, I guess, is what was then kind of remaining of that initial drusen. And at 18 months now, the entire portion of that lower half disappeared that we have photos of. But we're even still seeing changes even yet, to the point that we're still seeing changes and improvements even a year and a half after starting these treatments. And I think from our point of it now, it's something that's still seeing in the left eye, no lesions of geographic atrophy that have shown up in a place where a drusen once was, is one of the strongest evidences that we have, objectively speaking, to be able to show some of those improvements over time.
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of our cases, we've had patients who have had, in some cases, had some dramatic changes happen in a short run, kind of like what Dr. White was talking about, that we had. We had very few of them show some of the changes really, really early on in the process. But a lot of those changes was something that was in there for the long haul. It wasn't like it was something that we started a treatment on Monday and Thursday was the retina was completely cleared of decades worth of changes overall. Now, there's been a few of them. There was actually the guy that I had today was probably the fastest amount of changes that I've seen in a retina in a positive way, almost to the point of saying, I don't know if we need to do it as quickly. I'd actually prefer if it actually improved a little slower, just from a matter of saying I don't like suddenlies when it comes to the retina. But if it is something that in his case, he's still improved and stabilized and everything's looking great. I think it was something interesting that Dr. White said, in that the patients that actually seem to have the better control of their lifestyle changes, in general, they have better dietary improvements, they have better gut health regulation, they sleep better. I do actually see a note of it, and it's actually refreshing to hear that as well, saying that there's some other changes that you're noticing from patients who've had better lifestyle control. Because when you remove oxidative stress, it has to go somewhere. And if the surrounding environment is just as stressed as the retina you're trying to improve, there's going to be a steady flow. There's a steady state of having that stress in the retina, in the mitochondria, and there's stress in the environment around it that it doesn't have any place to kind of empty into, I guess, at that point. And so we have seen some of the patients that have improved the most were the ones that took better care of themselves. They exercised regularly. They did everything they could, not just in the sake of their eyes, but in every other part of the aspects of their life to see those improvements over time. So I'm actually interested to see those kind of effects whenever patients come out with like more of like lifestyle modifications. And that when I have patients ask me what's the supplement that you would have me on, I generally tell them that there's going to be much smarter providers than I that end up probably answering the question of which one's the best whenever it comes to being paired with this kind of evidence. And I do think that where you're at with, Dr. White, I do think that you're on that part of being able to see that there are certain supplements that do actually show better improvements compared to certain other ones. And I think that photobiomodulation results will be one of the main markers that really kind of determines that field, probably within the next 5 years, of the patients that have the most improvement versus those that switch and see better improvements over time. But for right now, we're super thrilled with the results. And this has been something that has been a dramatic change in our clinic. We actually
What
had
about
one of our
quality of life?
providers.
For
What's
your
that?
mom, for your mom, Dalton, what happened? Quality of life as she was undergoing these treatments, quality of
Oh,
vision.
she's as stubborn as ever. It's something that she just does what she wants to all the time. But I think it's something that, as far as kind of like, whenever Dr. White was talking about the ability of being able to kind of get across the ferry and that part of it, like my mom lived on the other side of town and we weren't able to get her in for treatments because she would just come in whenever she wanted to and then disappear because, she's just kind of had the run of the place. And so the main portion of how we kind of followed was very close to the protocol that we set for all of our patients for sure. But being able to effectively see 20/20 again and stay consistently in that range, and having it to where in that part of it, she doesn't have the fear of vision constantly disappearing day after day after day, is that she actually has that hope again that there's actually going to be a spot where she won't actually ever lose the vision in that eye. If it's something that she can maintain and keep and everything go in the direction that it has been and it continues to go, it's something that she feels like she's actually gotten that key to actually open up the remainder of that and not have to worry about all of the little details of doing everything perfectly and still seeing a decline happen in her vision.
Yeah, no, it's amazing and amazing results for both of you guys. So I'll conclude with this last question. Chris, you go first. If somebody is sitting on the sidelines right now and is hearing you guys talk about this and is trying to decide, like, should I do this for my patients? Is this something that I should be doing? What do you tell that person?
How could you not?
Yeah,
If you know about it, and we haven't said a thing that's a negative, we haven't hurt anybody. It supports itself financially. How could you not do it? That's why I own a second machine, and I'm thinking about 4 more clinics. To be honest, I look at the math on my dispensary. I just spoke to a doctor in Wyoming, and they sold their dispensary to somebody else. They don't even have one in their office. The amount of space that I could commit to 2 or 3 more of these instruments, I don't know. When you have this knowledge, how can you not do this for people?
Okay, that's well said, Dalton. What about you? Somebody's sitting on the sidelines, like, do I do this? Is it too early? Am I going to get in trouble? Is there something that's wrong with this thing? It sounds too good to be true.
Right. I think if there was anyone that would have been more skeptical, I don't know if you would have found one more skeptical than I whenever it was something that looked at this. I definitely had that doubting Thomas approach that I was like, if there's the wound, I'm going to stick my hand in it before I actually know whether or not this is real or not kind of deal. And whenever I look at this, if I didn't have the evidence that I have, I would probably not believe it if it was shown to me either. And if it's something that I didn't have the evidence of being able to see these kind of things, and this is something that this is just the tip. I think this is of the iceberg of what we have seen in this last year. Macular degeneration is one of the specialties that we are treating with this financially in clinic that is the biggest improvement. I refer to this whenever I'm talking with other doctors, is that I would say that this is on the same level of what cataract surgery was when it was introduced, decades ago, when it actually changed the entire direction and the landscape of what end of care looked like for a lot of patients who had what is now considered an incredibly treatable condition, almost to a routine standpoint in that case. That now having the opportunity of being able to treat so many different conditions with something that is simple and is safe and it's non-pharmaceutical, and it doesn't have to replace what they're doing, and it doesn't have to wait until we've lost vision to implement it, and the patients don't care on whether or not insurance is involved or not. They've been asking for these kind of improvements. And so now whenever I'm telling my patients and kind of introducing this to them, I'll tell them the thing of saying, look, regardless of whether or not you want to take part of this, but I just don't want to have this conversation where 5 years down the road, you find out that there was something I could have talked with you about before you lost vision, before you lost sight, and you ever found out that there was something that I had at my fingertips that could have prevented you from losing sight and could have prevented you from having this. And I never brought it up because insurance didn't have their act together for some reason. This is something that I say I'd rather bring it up and we talk about it for 30 seconds and then decide from there where to go from here. But from the providers that sit on the sidelines, I can tell you with full confidence this is not going anywhere. This is not a flash in a pan. You are going to see the number of specialties that start coming out with massive improvements. But I point out it this way, and I think that this makes a lot of sense when you think about it this way. Photobiomodulation is improving mitochondrial tissue in the cells. The retina, and the macula specifically, has one of the highest concentrations of mitochondria, metabolically speaking, anywhere in the body. If you think about every other location of how you access mitochondria from a treatment perspective, every single tissue between the outside world and that macula is transparent. Light goes to it directly. So if it's something that we look at it across specialties and subspecialties, I really don't think, I really do honestly believe that macular degeneration improvements will probably be one of the top 5 health improvements that are found across the entire board of photobiomodulation across every single specialty, because of how easy it is to get that treatment to the target location and to be able to access that care in a safe and a meaningful way.
I mean,
I agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
incredible. So, gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining me on the show today, for sharing some of the things you guys are doing. Truly appreciate your leadership, and I'll publish, with your permission, some information about you guys in the show notes so that people can reach out to you with more questions. Very grateful for your time today on the Power Hour. Incredible show.
Thank you for the invitation, Eugene.
Thank you. This is a wonderful time.